Morning, everyone. It's Deer Memorial Day. So here we are today, and we're going to discuss a topic that's certainly significant to all small businesses, and that is inflation. And how does it impact them today, and what's it going to do in the future? And so Ron's got some stats that he's going to go over with us, and we're going to discuss a little bit about the impact of inflation. So Ron, help us out here.
You bet. Thank you very much, Ray. Good to see both of you. And there was an article in the journal recently that was done. It's a nationwide survey of 1,259 small business owners. And so it's a recent one. It's taken from April 15th through the 20th. So it's an up to date kind of survey. And I put the chart up here so you can look at it, but I wanted the Wall Street Journal and Goldman Sachs to get credit for the information that we're looking at here. So you can see that we've talked a little bit about this before in terms of just general inflation, what to do about it. But so here are the most recent facts. We're up over 80% of small businesses are seeing labor as a significant impact on their doing business. Surprise, commercial insurance, about almost 70% see that as a significant factor. I had a conversation with a local insurance agent just Friday, on Wednesday, 3 days ago, and he indicated really how bad it is and how it's affected his business. Goods inputs, I mean, what we typically think about inflation is that, well, our costs of our merchandise, the cost of our services is going up. Well, it is. And, about 65% of them see that as a major issue. Employee benefits follows a little over 60%. Capital costs, of course, now we're talking about, most directly interest rates, right? And then, of course, rent is going up. And that's a little bit of a surprise. Almost half of them say that rent is higher, and I'm going to assume that that's because we have we're 2 or 3 years into this post-COVID or pre to post-COVID cycle, and as a result, we're starting to see leases come due, and people are pushing. Landlords are asking for a lot more rent, and that's becoming more of a problem apparently. So we're seeing the primary issues here as being labor, insurance, cost of merchandise, employee benefits, which is kind of the same thing as labor in a way. Cost of capital. Of course, you don't need capital if you're not going to grow, so that may or may not affect certain businesses, and then of course rent. So Ed, any comments on any of these particular ones, and maybe we could go through and have a conversation about each one, and any ideas we might have to help small businesses deal with or mitigate some of these costs.
Well, when you look at these percentages, I don't know how many years this is over. I guess since what's the time span on
Well, they're basically, it's just a point in time where they're saying, are they right now, how significant are these kinds of increases or costs on your particular business? So the people answering, they're probably thinking collectively about how long they've been up and how rough they've been to deal with. But I think they're basically saying, as of right now, these are the number of people who say that certain expenses are an issue.
Oh, okay.
And therefore, 80% of these small business respondents say labor is a significant impact on their business.
Yeah, when you look at California, it's even going to be more. So what does it kind of tell you when you're looking at running a business? It sure sounds like you want to use the least amount of labor as possible, which means you want to automate your processes, and you want to be able to not have to hire people and do everything internally in the company. So that's a big issue. And then you look at insurance. Wow, I mean, in California, there's all kinds of insurance, obviously, but carriers are dropping a lot of insurance for homeowners and businesses, and workers' comp's always been a challenge. So, man, these are really impactful numbers, and I would totally agree with it. I even rent, and you look at these small little retail outlets like in San Diego where I live, and what they pay for rent for a little piece of space so they can run a business, it's astronomical.
Yeah, yeah.
And they keep going up, or it's a percentage of their sales. It's almost like you're in business just to pay your rent. So,
Yeah.
yeah, these are
You know,
really challenging.
I wanted to ask you guys about the impact of COVID on this. You know, what happened 4 years ago. Think about all the businesses that left and came and started working out of their homes, and all these buildings were vacant. So, you know, there's an internal amount of pressure on the housing or the commercial market, you know, to raise rents because nobody's coming back, or fewer people are coming back than there is places open. Is that accurate in San Diego? I know it seems to be that way here. I mean, there's a lot of available space.
Yeah, for like office space is really challenged right now. If you have Class A office space, everybody wants to be in the nicest rental space. But then the Class B and C are really struggling because not all the workforce has come back to work. And I think businesses have learned how to operate with fewer people, because look at this chart, that labor is the number one issue, right? So the more you can reduce your labor, the better chances you are to be able to survive and thrive. So that's a very good point, Ray.
Right. And then if you are reducing labor, if you can figure out a way to do it, that's obviously going to impact how many people are going to rent. And so
Yeah.
when you're renting, and that becomes a problem, that gives you even more incentive to reduce your labor. So I mean, it's a vicious cycle. You know, the more labor is a problem, the worse the rental is going to be. Now, eventually, that's got to turn around, and those prices, just due to supply and demand, will begin to drop. So it's kind of interesting that we must be in the first part of the rent cycle in terms of commercial rents, where they're still going up because people are trying to recover costs that maybe they incurred during the pandemic. But certainly that particular number has got to turn around. I think if you can survive long enough, rents are going to have to come down. And of course, it depends on if it's a triple net, and you've got utilities, which are increasing at 12%, I think, is what I calculated from Southern California Electric. It's only a few cents the way that they've presented it, but if you calc out the number, it's between 8 and 12%. So, you know, utilities are being forced up by California in other blue states intentionally. So that's adding a significant amount to inflation, and certainly some of the worries. Although utilities is not specifically mentioned here. I want to pop back on the commercial insurance that you brought up, Ed, and tell you a little bit about this conversation I had with a local insurance broker who's the owner of his own business. About 80% of his business is commercial business as opposed to residential business. We've heard a lot of the stories about residential fire businesses kind of changing and going through the roof, really. Some of those are expected to go 20, 30% higher, maybe more, due to insurance companies leaving over California governance of the insurance industry. And we've had State Farm, Berkshire, and a whole host of other companies leaving California because they cannot keep up with the loss ratio. So he has said that they left commercial insurance alone, and now it's beginning to affect commercial insurance. So what we're seeing in the housing market is expected to make businesses even worse. So some of these people have just had conversations with their insurance broker and are realizing they're going to have significant increases in their insurance. Now, insurance is typically not a deal breaker for most businesses because it's just a percent or 2 or 3% of what their revenue is. So that's not going to put people out of business, I don't think. But the raises, the increases are dramatic in certain places. So that has become a major concern. I'm very surprised that the commercial insurance is seen as a major problem by nearly 70% of the respondents in this particular survey. That's quite interesting. Let's talk a little bit about labor and employee benefits, and what can be done. You mentioned, Ed, automation. Let's do we have some specific ideas about how to go about that? How does a small business person deal with some of these labor issues? Ray, you got any ideas there? You're an old manufacturing continuous improvement guy. How do you lower your labor while trying to maintain a continuous improvement?
What I see happening, and we've certainly discussed this, is AI is going to have a huge impact on things that don't require hands-on. And what I mean by that, literally, somebody can turn on a switch or turn off a switch, that may or may not be automated before too long. So I think that's going to have the biggest impact because AI is so much cheaper than all the costs associated with having a person. So we're going to see more and more of the trend to AI, multiplying geometrically in my mind.
I've noticed in my career, for whatever reason, companies would rather spend money repairing equipment rather than buying new equipment that is the latest technology and more productive. I don't really understand that. I guess it's the cost. You might have to spend $50,000, but in the long run, you might make a 30% return on that investment. But that's always been an issue. When I was in the newspaper business, we used to have some old labeling machines that were 30 years old, and we would spend all week repairing them so that they could do labels next Sunday. And then we got the labels through, and then we had to spend a week's worth of repair work to get them back up and running again for the next week. Now, that isn't a real healthy way of doing business.
Yeah.
And so we made a justification for new equipment and with a real high return, and eventually someone bought off on it and we made the investment. But that is, I don't understand that. And I think a lot of businesses have that mentality. I don't know where they got it. I think it comes down to a buck here compared to a buck there. I look at things as investments. I will spend $100,000 if it's going to make me $300,000 or $400,000 in the long run. To me, that's a good deal.
Well, are you tying that into if you buy new equipment, you don't have to have too much labor?
That's right. Well, the
So-
point, you don't have the labor. That's right.
Yeah.
But for whatever reason, people are reluctant to do that. They'd rather keep the labor machine going, and
Yeah.
labor's become more and more expensive as they've raised the minimum wages, and the very difficult overtime of rules and regulations have made the labor really jump in cost compared to everything else.
Yeah.
And that's kind of why I think labor is number one issue for small business.
Yeah, it's affecting everything. And I would suggest that in my experience, the reason small business tends to make short-term decisions, especially in capital equipment purchases, et cetera, is because they just don't have the money. And many times they don't have the credit, so that they can't borrow the money. Or in a case like we are today, if you're paying 7, 8, 9%, or even more, depending on the type of, say, private credit that's out there, you can't justify it anymore, even if you had the credit to borrow it. So, going from 3 or 4% or 5, and doubling that number makes it harder. But so many of them are already operating at their credit limit. There's just no cash. And so the tough part there is that you're not making very much money because you're paying paying more for everything, and therefore you're having a hard time accumulating the cash so that you can buy something. It's a catch-22. It's really a difficult thing to do, and of course it really requires an incredibly disciplined business owner to be able to balance the cash flow needs with the growth possibilities, with the labor and capital investment. It's a really gnarly problem, and that's why I think that they have trouble dealing with it.
Well, thank you for articulating that. It makes some sense what you're saying. And those are valid points. But I guess it comes right down to, if you have a business, you have to have the capital, and the working capital in particular, to support it. So another issue that we've seen in our careers, and we work on various customers together, is the appetite from a lot of companies to take too much money out of the business.
Mm.
And
Yeah.
they're looking more at their personal pocketbooks than the company, but they don't realize the company is the one responsible for filling up their personal pocketbooks.
Right.
So it's a real challenging issue, and boy, you guys know we've had some really tough discussions with people about taking money out when they shouldn't.
Yeah.
And they don't have the money, it's gonna hurt the business. So they pull too much out, they don't have enough to invest in the business. So therefore they have no options to the high labor costs.
Yeah,
I
that's
was gonna add another dimension to the maintenance thing that you brought up. And, part of that is that, okay, we've got 2 maintenance guys, right? And if we get a new machine, what are we gonna do with these 2 guys? And because there's this attachment to the employees, they don't want to let them go. They say, well, no, let's continue to repair the machines instead of biting the bullet and saying, we're gonna get a new machine and let one of those guys go.
That's an excellent point, Ray. That is so true. And in the case with the labeling machines, that was part of it.
yeah. Yeah, that's right. Small business people tend not to want to make those kind of tough decisions, and to their credit, they care about their people more than their people know, and they don't want to let them go, and they feel for their families, and they understand some of the pain. Most small business people, having been through a lot of pain already, if they have very many employees, they kind of know what that's like, or they remember their parents going through really tough times, balancing all of those things. But I think that's really true, Ed. What you're saying is something that I have to admit I wasn't very good at doing in all the businesses I started, and that is being properly capitalized. I could have done some things better had I not had to balance all of these things all the time. Fortunately, I tended to start businesses in markets where there was a very serious need, and therefore I could get margins that were a little bit higher than normal. So the interesting thing is that as we end up having conversation about, well, how do you mitigate some of these pricing increases, it ends up always coming back to strategy. If you're already in business and you already have certain debt service, and you recognize you need a new machine, if you have not properly planned to when you started the business for being properly capitalized, you're now stuck. You're like in jail. You're in servitude to the company that doesn't have enough capital and doesn't have the best employees to create the best efficiency in the company. So it really says a lot. And I've learned this from you, Ed, is that it says a lot about having the right amount of money before you start the stupid business.
Well, I
Don't
think,
just start it. You got to have the money first, or you're just going to have a world of pain for years and years.
to add to that, Ron, I mean, truthfully, 80% of small businesses we know that survive with the owner alone. And as a consequence, what he started out with was financial freedom. What he ended up with was a jail.
Right, right.
I mean, it's really sad, but that's, they die in business. How many people do we know like that who just, keep going until they die, and
But
then
there's
somebody
one.
close the doors.
So here's a great exit strategy that we haven't really talked about. We've talked a lot
Yeah.
about exit strategies, and that is buy a really, really big life insurance policy. Right?
Yeah.
You buy a key man policy that is big enough to fund your family for the next generation in the business, you see, because that's the only way they're going to get the money is by you dying. Now that's really kind of sad. It's kind of sick, but it's a little bit too close to true, isn't it?
Yeah. You really cut close to the bone on that one.
Yeah. That's right. It is so difficult to really make a lot of money in small business and be properly capitalized, or to be in business long enough and have the patience to accumulate the capital over many years of good profit. It's much harder than most people realize. And when we talk about people getting out of business, it's hard to get out because so many times the business never really made it to the place to where it was properly capitalized, that they had the right people, that it was running itself, like we've talked about so many times. So this whole the situation you get into today is partially because you started on the wrong premise.
Right. I mean, the truth is, what we're talking about is that this desire to become independent ultimately ends up being a trap. And I mean, it's most guys cannot leave their business. They're just absolutely stuck in it, and will have to until they expire. So, and
Yeah.
we were talking about the insurance side, and I think with regard to employee benefits, one of the challenges is health insurance. If you've got a small staff, you probably have health insurance, and think about the rising cost of that along with the commercial insurance. It's extremely difficult.
Yeah, it certainly is. Everything is difficult. I had a conversation with a guy was doing some paving down on the alley behind my property. I thought it was an alley. Turns out it's a fire road, and nobody's been back there for I don't know how many years, and there are weeds all over the place. And so, I mean, it's going to be a little bit of an improvement. I'm not really sure why they did it, but because they paved part of it, they didn't really need to. But in making sure that my property wasn't getting overrun or something was happening, I'd go down there and kind of get to know the operator. Turns out it was a single guy who had this little construction company. I think he had 2 full-time employees, and he's running the tractor. And they've got a tractor, a front loader, and a dump truck, and I mean, so 2 or 3 pieces of equipment. And I said, so how's it going, and what's it like working for the city? Oh man, I'm glad to have the business, but wow, it's tough. I go, what do you mean exactly? He said, well, it's always low cost bidder, always. He said, it's all about price. So that they lay it out, and you're supposed to do this and so much asphalt and so many square feet. And so everybody has the same criteria. And so what you do is you try and figure out how to cut your costs to the bone so that you might make a little bit of money. And he said, it is really hard to be able to do this. Working for cities is so difficult because, you can only make a small margin. And he said, no, take a look. I've got $450,000 worth of equipment. Three pieces, $450,000.
Right.
How am I supposed to pay for this stuff?
Yeah.
I have to keep it running all the time just to make sure I can make the payments on it.
Right.
So you see, this is what you're saying, Ray. It's like He thought because he knew how to run big equipment that he could do just as well as his boss, you know? And so what he finds out is that he's now a slave to the equipment payments.
Yeah.
He has to take the low margin jobs because he has to cover his fixed expenses.
Yeah.
So there's just no choice. So, you know, I mean, if you didn't have the equipment, or if you could, I don't know, lease equipment at lower costs per job or something. I mean, you know, you wonder. It's almost like, Ed, you'd like to do an analysis of the business and determine if owning the equipment was the best idea. You know, maybe it doesn't really work if you're interested in high margin jobs. Maybe you don't have any equipment, and then
Or lease the equipment.
yeah, you lease it or you rent it, but figure out all the alternatives. So when we're talking about small businesses trying to mitigate costs, it really isn't like, well, I'm just going to cut some people, or I think I'll try to renegotiate my rent. I mean, you need to do those, but it really has to do with the structural nature of the numbers of your business as to how you're going to be able to strategically build expenses against likely revenue that makes sense so that you can get some profit. It's just not that easy to do.
Well, it comes back to a strategic plan.
You bet.
We talked about a strategic plan, and Ray and I have done a couple of them. They're really important for setting priorities. And a lot of times the wrong priorities are being used to run a business. So the strategic plan sets everything in motion. It gives you benchmarks for the future to measure against and to hold people accountable and to reward people for superior performance.
Right.
Well, and I think if I can inject this in here, we're talking about a guy who says, I can do that, right? So whether it's the plumber, or yesterday we had a guy out here trimming trees or whatever it is, he says, I can do that. And he knows nothing about running a business. All he knows is how to trim trees or how to do what you were just talking about. And getting into a business is such an important thing to understand. Strategic planning, they have no idea what that even means.
Yeah, right.
It
Right.
all comes down to, I can do that.
Yeah, that's right. And
Well,
then
that's a
they've
good
got,
point.
yeah, then they've got to pay for that big, you know, $400,000 lift. And
Yeah.
now all of a sudden, you know, because you can just hear these guys thinking this way. They come in, they take a look at your trees, and they go, well, that's a pretty big tree. You know, I'm going to have to bring a lift in.
Yeah.
And then, well, no, you know, I can't do that. I can't do that. And pretty soon they're going, if I don't have a lift, I'm not going to be able to be able to be full service. I'm going to have to get a big lift with a bucket, or I'm out of business. And now he's just spent all of that money. He didn't think about how many jobs he was going to have to do in order to pay for it. He just thought, well, I can't grow if I don't have a bucket. And they buy equipment. They're collecting these like they're Tonka toys.
Right. On the other side of the coin, trying to do it without a lift truck, having a poor guy 40 feet up in the air on a little limb because the owner wants very minor changes. They want to keep the tree, right?
Yeah.
So this guy's on a limb that's what, an inch in circumference or something like that.
Yeah.
And one mistake, he's dead.
That's
or
right.
Paralyzed for life.
Yeah.
Who's going to pay the bill on that?
Yeah, and Ed, I mean, I'm sitting here in the house watching this guy climbing a tree behind my pool, and I'm thinking, God, I hope he doesn't fall, because I didn't know who was going to be liable for that.
Well, guess what?
That's you,
It's
Ray.
probably you, because it's your property. And that's, so my neighbor just had her tree done this week, matter of fact. And that poor guy, if he fell, guess who's responsible? And I don't think they were prepared for it. They don't think they have any insurance. They were naive on it. And
Yeah, you have to have, I mean, I carry like triple insurance, you know, for backup, because as you both know, I have a lot of really big trees, and you know, I've had already three major projects, and I still have trimming to do. I never imagined I was going to have to spend so much money on trimming, but it scares me every time because they come out and they're, and they on these guys skinny up 60-foot palm trees.
I know.
No equipment, no safety net, nothing. They just skinny
I
up
know.
there and cut them off. It's unbelievable. So yeah, it's pretty scary. So having extra liability insurance is important, and even umbrella. And I've got umbrella coverage just in case that runs out.
Well, the homeowner's thinking it's covered by the tree cutting service, and it's
Well, you hope so. And I always require a certificate of, so that we know that there's that they're properly insured. And in fact, I just did that, with another project I'm doing on a septic tank. And it's like, I'll sign it, but if you don't send me the insurance certificates first, this thing's null and void.
well, that's a good practice, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Best practice.
Yeah. And businesses need to do that as well, because they can get caught. So
Absolutely.
well, I don't think we have come up with any easy ways to handle this problem today, except I think we have come up with something that many people who are watching this won't want to hear. And that is the best way to control your costs and inflation is to be properly capitalized with a good strategy when you start. And, maybe a good subject for the future would be, if you've already started your business, how do you build a strategy that gets you to where you need to go?
Well, I can tell you right now
than-
what the answer is, and that's a strategic plan, which
That's right.
starts with a SWOT analysis with your key employees and maybe your customers and vendors, etc. You can really put something together that makes a lot of sense. But of course, business owners are so focused on day to day, they don't see the relevance of strategic planning many times.
Well, so fighting inflation and price increases and all of that, it reminds me of a guy running around trying to kill mosquitoes one at a time, slapping them with his hands and running all over with a room full of mosquitoes, and without taking the time to get out the spray and spray to kill them all at once. That's what that reminds me of.
Yeah, so if you're a consultant looking at it a little bit differently, you want to work for a business owner that is open mind. And if they have an open mind, there's all kinds of great things that you can do together.
Yeah.
But if they know everything and they have a closed mind, you're wasting your time. You might as well find another client.
Yeah, I was just, because we were talking about this and the importance of knowing why you start, having a plan for it. And we've talked about these before, but these are the most recent statistics on failure rate in small business. 20% fall within the first year. By the end of the second year, 30% have failed. By the end of the fifth year, half of them are gone. Isn't that amazing? I mean, and then at the end of 10 years, there's just a small minority left.
Yeah, well,
yeah, that's why I think it's a better strategy to buy an existing business that's been operating for several years successfully and try to improve upon it rather than starting from scratch. I think it's very, very difficult to start from scratch.
yeah, it is.
There's just so many issues you have to consider.
So I think here what we've done is we've come up with a couple of answers. Number one, when you go broke, properly capitalize your next business.
Yeah.
And so, maybe we can kind of close with because the average person does really well, they say, it's had 3 businesses or two to 3 businesses to start with. And so you start and you learn and you start and you learn. So I mean, it's sort of like, you need to put together the right plan for the right market with the right money. So I guess that's probably a pretty good place to stop. And next time we'll talk about how to do that.
Fabulous.
All right, great. Thank you all. We'll see you.